Hi, my name is Ninqi F. Stratton, and I'm talking about my project on environmental psychology with some elements of gestalt psychology as well. Through the use of Sankofa in action, where we go back to the past and go back to what has existed and fetch it to bring it to the future, to transmute it into something more positive, I'll be looking at how the neighborhood of Tioga in Philadelphia has been impacted through the lens of environmental psychology and treat the changes that have negatively affected the people in this neighborhood through the lens of environmental psychology and gestalt psychology to help highlight ways that the negative impacts that have happened on the neighborhood can be transmuted into something more positive. So in the neighborhood of Tioga, there's a history of white supremacy in terms of the legislations, in terms of the changes in the vegetation in the area, and even in the reasoning behind when and why the streets were tarred over and when the bricks were even taken out of the ground. So the neighborhood was a very industrialized neighborhood. There were ample factory jobs. For example, Bud manufacturing plant was right at the center of Tioga and was a major employer for everyone that lived in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was built on providing a place for families to live, and a large number of those families were headed by a male household income that was taken through military involvement. For example, my grandfather was the first black man to do inventory for the Army. So that's just one example of how the households worked. Further, as an example of how historic the neighborhood actually is. The neighborhood is full of people and families that were highly famous or did something majorly impactful for the city of Philadelphia or the nation. There are a lot of major doo-wop groups that were created in this area and exploded from there. A lot of funk artists came from our neighborhood. And my father, for example, David Stratton, even invented the Adopt a School program, which has nationally impacted a lot of places to positively enhance the lives of some young students. So this project specifically looks at how white supremacy impacted the neighborhood through its landscape and through the way that the residents actually are able to interact with one another. So the project itself is twofold. It looks at bringing in more trees and greening the neighborhood, is fighting against the food desert that's in the neighborhood, and it is teaching residents about the past of the neighborhood and showing us examples of how we can take the things that we see in the neighborhood that are negative, that we would like to see changed, and bring that towards the positive. So, for example, one page of the book will highlight how the bricks that paved the roads in Tioga were taken up and used to pave Old City and the Rittenhouse area as we have it now in Philadelphia. The bricks you walk on in these areas were taken specifically from blocks in Tioga, like, for example, Pacific Street. Almost all of the blocks in Tioga were double tree-lined. So when you walk down the street, large trees on each side of the block would be tree-lined. It had nice shade. It kept temperatures cooler, kept temperatures warmer in each season that it needed to be so. And, of course, that kept your property values a lot higher than they are now. One thing that Tioga Neighbors is doing in conjunction with a few other organizations this year, as opposed to in years before, we're hosting the free fruit tree giveaways, where all you do is just sign up and then you come collect the tree, or we bring it out to you if you're one of our disabled or elderly residents in the neighborhood. This helps with greeting to keep your air conditioning and heating temperatures down. And they can provide shade and they provide food, which helps prevent some of the food scarcity issues that pretty much everyone in Tioga experiences. So part of the goal is to bring back the double tree line streets and to foster a interest in becoming part of the actual environment that we live in. Another page of the book shows that Tioga is a neighborhood for families. Tioga is full of 3-story homes and little mansions all around. A lot of the mansions, however, despite my efforts, have been converted into apartments instead of keeping the architecture as it is and, cultivating them and cleaning them up for the use of single families. A lot of people in Tioga have large single families. However, the real estate market dictates that you should use any residence for its best and highest use, and that best and highest use typically leans toward how much money you can make as a homeowner or a landowner versus what is actually best for any given community. Tioga is leaning toward becoming one of those areas where a large number of homes and houses are all being converted into rental spaces, which changes the absolute culture of the area, and we don't want that. So preserving Tioga for families is one thing that we would like everyone to think about. Business is another concern that we address in the little coloring book. Business in Tioga and the surrounding areas used to be very, very booming, for lack of better words. But nowadays we have more churches than businesses, and we have a major food desert. The laundromats, for example, in the area are mostly gone, and the population in the area still actually relies on these kinds of resources. So not having a supermarket anymore, not having a laundromat anymore, for example, where these locations used to be, a lot of them are now churches. One goal is to bring more businesses back into the area. A lot of the homes aren't zoned against any kind of business that is quiet. So that is one method we can use to bring more businesses back to the area. Another method we can use is to get the corner stores that are owned and operated by people from outside of the community and see if we can acquire corner spaces for stores that actually serve the community well. So these are just examples. So if you go to the business section, you'll see an example of how one business is now a church, the laundromat example. And then from that example to the other side of the page, which is blank, and lets you draw in yourself what your dream business to see in Tioga might be. It could be a pet store. It could be a hardware store. We don't have any of those things, but we do have a lot of vacant large buildings. If the residents of Tioga would like to work together to really create a strong community, things we need to look into include this kind of concept of revitalizing businesses, bringing in the businesses that we need and the businesses that people outside of our own community need, which is supermarkets, which is hardware stores, which is pet stores, things like that. Things that you would see at a mall, if we can bring into the empty factories around here, mall-style stores, we will revitalize the area very quickly. Also, as part of the efforts to combat the food desert and to bring better mental health to the community is the back of the book, where there are pages with recipes for what you can do with the fruit that you're harvesting from your fruit trees. Some of the fruit trees in the neighborhood are trees that bear nuts. Some bear actual fruit, like pawpaws, a traditional fruit in Pennsylvania, native to America, and little sold in stores. It's very rare to find it in a store, but to have a fresh pawpaw is fantastic. Peaches, there's pie recipes, dinner recipes, things like this. You can always make something very delicious. And in doing so, in sharing a recipe, you cultivate a cultural standard. You cultivate something to converse over with your peers or with your children or with your neighbors. And it also reinforces the idea that a community should share amongst itself. If one home only has peach trees, but they want to make a pawpaw recipe, they can ask their neighbor for some pawpaws. It creates interconnectedness that has been lost over the years due to the loss of community gardens, loss of the double tree-lined streets, loss of businesses to be converted into churches, which typically happen to be owned and operated by somebody from outside of the community and serves people from outside of the community itself, which is, in my experience, quite strange. But I have not researched whether that is a standard among religious communities or not. Take that as you have it. And ultimately, the full spectrum of the Greening Project, which connects people to nature around them. It connects people to their community. It connects people to their history. And it reminds us that if we want a better future, we actually have to work for it ourselves. We can't just wait on someone else or a stranger to come in and think they know what's best for us. We always know what's best for ourselves. And it just takes some effort to recognize what those things might be that we need. So for Tioga, I have addressed the needs of some community issues here. And I'm sure there's a lot more work that anyone can do on top of this or around this to build an even stronger bridge from the past to the future. But, working with Tioga United, the other organization, or with the Nicetown CDC, or with the Philadelphia Land Bank, for example. And the fruit tree giveaway is actually sponsored by the Philadelphia Parks Department. So without them as a sponsor to help actually bring us the trees and through this grant program, there would be a lot less being done. So thank you to all of those groups that have helped with this so far. And I think beyond this project, I would like to start acquiring land to open a community orchard, but we're not there yet. This project, all it does is begin to combat the food desert. It begins to combat the property value issue. It begins to address the community togetherness issue, and it is fantastic. So I'm really glad that this project was assigned so that I could really spend some time working on this. And I think that presenting some of this information in the coloring book format actually allows more people to engage with it. Modern culture loves memes, children love coloring, and people always need something to do to relax. And the coloring book aspect addresses all of those kinds of qualities in a very easily accessible way. It doesn't require you to really, spend a lot of time researching anything. It just presents it very plainly, very simply, and allows the mind to integrate it a lot more subtly than being forced to regurgitate information or do research on one's own. When the people in Tioga, for example, a lot of them are single parent households, or they're taking care of, or it's young people taking care of their grandparents. They may not have that time to go and decide to research the history of Tioga and, or look up how to start a garden. So this project gets the ball rolling for them, gets the ball rolling for all of us, and hopefully will make a very positive impact on the mental health of people in Tioga. Because once a community gets together, because once a community has better food, because a community, works hard to build something, there is always a shift in consciousness that I think will be extremely beneficial. Thank you. The project focuses on environmental psychology because I wanted to look at the landscape versus how people in the neighborhood are actually surviving with what has happened to it. A lot of the people that live here have lived here with their grandparents, since their grandparents have lived here. So at least 3 generations, nobody has left. The people that do leave tend to always come back because they care about their elders. So they come back to take care of them. So either way, people that come to Tioga generally have not left unless they were part of the white flight phenomenon. So specifically, what is environmental psychology, and when was it founded? So environmental psychology looks at that juxtaposition, how people relate to their environment and how that affects their mental health. Wilheim Wundt was actually an instrumental player in creating this style of psychology. And one factor that I wanted to address with this project is how people get stuck into different paradigms, and they end up focusing on just survival and may not use the resources to the best of their ability due to a few things like habituation or becoming numb to their environment. And instead of people being habituated and numb, I wanted to see them, thrive and be able to actually adapt to the changes and then transmute those changes into something positive. So, for example, habituation is this idea where a person's environment begins to decline, and people might care when the decline first happens, but once that decline is no longer, novel to notice, people will just begin to ignore it and become used to it. And when a person is numb to their surroundings, it's basically the same kind of thing where people's awareness towards what's going on around them, it just slowly declines such that their awareness, or rather their lack of awareness, actually becomes detrimental to their safety and their survival. For example, a lot of the neighbors in the area don't know a lot about the history in the neighborhood, despite everybody being close to their grandparents in this neighborhood. They seem to have stopped discussing these kinds of things about 15 years ago when the last community garden was taken away. And this is before the efforts over these past 3 years that a few groups have put together to try to acquire land to start revitalizing the neighborhood. But it's only been this past year that anything effective has actually been happening. So just considering the specific kind of demographics that's in the neighborhood, and then looking at how we can leverage these groups inside of the neighborhood, the very young and the very old, to work together to build a true awareness to what's going on in the neighborhood, I think is very beneficial. And the reason why I chose to use the environmental psychology perspective, and gestalt comes into it in the coloring book itself, where there are where I tried to use the concepts of gestalt to refocus the mind toward no longer being habituated to the idiosyncrasies in the environment of the neighborhood, so that people can begin to start to pay attention to what needs to be changed, and then decide to focus on actually changing it. So here, when we're applying gestalt, we are using different perceptual shifts in the drawings themselves, but gestalt itself is going to be used where we're shifting people's perception of the neighborhood from the decimated and, degreened and burnt down vision that we have right now towards what we're actually looking for, where everyone is going to be focusing on regreening, raising their property values back, and actually changing things for the better. Reinforcing these perceptual shifts about the environment itself, they're all extremely important and will absolutely support the shift toward better mental health and better communication between neighbors and their relationship to the neighborhood itself.